And if anyone can guess which house I live in, get your money back.
Beyond this straight stretch, the river flows through a series of long meandering bends, passing en route through the 12,000-acre estate of the Duke of Westminster. The family's name is Grosvenor, and their home, Eaton Hall, has been a family possession since the 15th century. The Grosvenors can trace their lineage back directly to William the Conqueror himself. Today, not only are they the biggest landowner in Chester, but also in London, with properties in Grosvenor Square, Belgravia, and Mayfair to have asked. Florida, came back the reply. The first Eaton Hall was built between 1675 and 1683 to a design by William Samwell, using Sir Thomas Grosvenor, and so on conclusion of his business with the gentleman of the house, so the story goes. Public golf course, but worries over the increasing risk of terrorist attacks during the 1990s forced the Duke to have it closed. Today it is a deer park, home to some 600 head of fallow deer. Over the River Severn in Shropshire. The bridge has a span of 150 feet and a roadway width of 16 feet. It was built to link the estate village of Alford on the left-hand bank with the rest of the estate, and following its completion was described by one writer of the day as possibly the most elegant iron bridge in existence. You'll see next to the bridge on the right-hand side is Alford Lodge. It was built in the late 1800s, again for the first Duke, to a design by a famous Chester Victorian architect by the name of John Douglas. He was responsible for some 400 buildings in and around the city, many of them commissioned by the first Duke. Notice the lovely barley sugar twist chimneys and the blue diamond brickwork on the front of the building. These were Douglas's trade constantly thronged with gaily dressed people in their Sunday best, enjoying the cream teas. And since many of those who chartered barges would also hire musicians to entertain them, there would be music and dancing as well. The tea room closed its doors at the onset of the First World War and has never reopened.
Oh, that's good. Jump off there, see?
Quite impressive. Quite a lot of that actually. Weather was pretty ordinary, wasn't it?
I guess that's good.
A little further on, note the lodge. As the vessel moves on downstream, almost immediately note the large glass-fronted building on the right-hand side, known as the Red House. It was actually painted a vivid red until quite recently, but toned down to its present color to blend in more naturally with the river environment. There has been a public house on this site since 1850. A tea room was installed in its riverside gardens in 1890, followed by a ferry service which operated from 1900 until the early 1950s. Today it is a modern restaurant. A little further on, note the large apartment block. Built in 1979, it is known as Riverside Court. From 1868 until the 1970s, this was the site of another public house and lodgings known as the White House Hotel. The hotel provided rowing boats for hire, and it too ran a ferry service until the onset of the Second World War. Beyond Riverside Court, and continuing for quite some distance on the right-hand side, look out for some riverside wooden cottages, which were once part of the property of the large houses to the rear. Over the years, many of these riverside holdings have been sold off. Prices vary considerably depending on their size and quality, but are quite expensive considering that the owners cannot live in them and insurance is difficult because of the likelihood of flooding. Now turning to the left-hand side and far away in the distance, you will soon be able to see part of the city skyline. To begin with, look out for the four turrets atop our majestic cathedral. Originally, this was the site of a 7th century Saxon minster, but following the arrival of William the Conqueror in the 11th century, the first Norman Earl of Chester, Hugh de Brant, authorized the building of an abbey here in 1092. In 1540, along came Henry VIII, and in order to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, he split with the Church of Rome and made himself head of the newly formed Church of England. Just to the left of the cathedral, note the tall pointed tower standing high above Chester's Town Hall, seat of local government since it was built in 1869. Very much in the style of a French chateau, but surprisingly designed by a young Irishman, William of Belfast, when only 29 years of age. Still on the left-hand side, but sweeping well to the right, you will notice a tall chimney. This is Chester's lead shot tower. This tower was built in 1799 to provide lead shot, otherwise known as musket balls, primarily for use as ammunition in the Napoleonic Wars. Although a number of such towers were built at this time, Chester's Tower remains not only as the oldest of the 3 remaining towers in the UK, but as a reminder of those far-off days. I'm sure you will have noted that for quite some time only by the Norman Earls. When the last Earl died without an heir in 1237, the land passed to the Crown and was eventually sold off. Today it's a water meadow prone to winter flooding, and just as in medieval times, is still referred to as the Earl's Eye. Turning once more to the right-hand side, one can't help but notice the large castle-type building set back in the trees. It is known as Walmore Hill, and was originally built as the retirement home of a very famous Chester Victorian architect by the name of John Douglas. He was responsible for more than 400 buildings in and around the city, and was particularly noted for his splendid chimneys, some resembling sticks of barley sugar. By far his most famous piece of work is the marvellous wrought iron framework supporting Chester's beautiful clock astride the Eastgate, the symbol of Chester throughout the world. Building work started on Walmore Hill in 1898, but unfortunately was still not quite finished by the time of John Douglas's death in 1911. This particular stretch of the river is known as Dee Ford and was the site of a Roman ford way back in the 1st century AD. It's quite shallow here even today, and it's still possible to walk across at this point without getting one's hair wet. Now in view on the right-hand side is a splendid 19th century Queen building with a red roof. Once the residence of a wealthy Victorian family, it is now divided into self-contained. Many of the buildings from this point on were constructed around the mid-19th century, in most cases for the well-to-do people of the day. The railways came to Chester in the 1840s and tourism started to boom. The city also became a fashionable centre for the rich and famous, many of whom chose to build their houses in the suburbs. This particular area, known as Borden, approximately 1 mile from the city centre, was just one of them. Today, many of the buildings have been split into apartments or taken over by various businesses. This summer was also very significant 2,000 years ago. The Romans of the day discovered natural water springs in the vicinity and pumped their supplies into the city by means of lead pipes and an aqueduct. Our modern city today takes some of its water supply from this same area. Shortly coming into view on the right-hand side and standing out very prominently is the lovely Church of St. Paul. Although initially built in 1830, it was comprehensively restored in 1876 by that same previously mentioned Victorian architect, John Douglas. Between the church and the buildings below is a small lane known as Barrowell Hill. Today, the lane is not visible from this viewpoint, but in medieval times it ran all the way down to the river's edge. To explain this strange name, one has to go back to that period and the practice of witchcraft. Ladies, under suspicion, were brought here, tied into a barrel, and then rolled down the hill into the river. Should the lady subsequently drown, then she would be deemed innocent and already on her way to heaven. However, should she survive this ordeal, then she would be declared guilty, taken from the barrel and transferred to a place of execution, where she would then be hanged. Clearly a classic no-win situation. Just a little distance beyond the church, look out for an overgrown, uncultivated area known as Hangman's Hill. This was the place where such executions were carried out. A little known fact is that 15% of those executed were actually men. It is still consecrated land and is unlikely to be built upon in the foreseeable future. From the 13th to the 17th century, some 300,000 unfortunates suffered similar deaths throughout Europe. The last such trials in England were in 1712. For many years, this was also the site of more general public executions, the last one being in 1801, when John Clare, a young man in his 20s, was convicted of stealing and brought here in chains to await hanging. Having escaped from custody, he then drowned trying to swim across the river to safety. Nonetheless, he was dragged from the river and hanged anyway. The whole gory process took well over an hour and caused such revulsion that public executions on this spot stopped forthwith. However, they still continued elsewhere in the city until 1866. Just ahead on the right-hand side, and partially hidden by the huge trees, look out for the very tall red brick building, in appearance just like a fairy tale castle. This was once the home of the author Thomas Hughes, who amongst other literary works wrote Tom Brown's School Days. Published in 1856, it recounted some of his experiences at Rugby School. As a member of the legal profession, he moved to Chester in 1880 to the lovely Georgian buildings on the right-hand side. Known as Diva Terrace, they were actually built by the Victorians. Diva was the name given to the city 2,000 years ago by the Romans, in in honor of the Celtic goddess of this very same River Dee on which you are now sailing. Now come to Grosvenor Park on the right-hand side. This 20-acre plot of land was given to the people of Chester in the 1860s by Richard Grosvenor, the second Marquess of Westminster. I'm sure that many of you will be surprised to know that the very first public park in the world was laid out in Birkenhead, a town north of here just across the River Mersey from Liverpool. It was landscaped in 1847 by Joseph Paxton, that very same architect responsible for London's Crystal Palace Gardens, laid out for the Great Exhibition of 1851. Very shortly, on the right-hand side, you will see some of Chester's premier rowing clubs up here. The Royal Chester, formed in 1838, is one of the oldest in the UK. The King's School, formed in 1887, is also the oldest school in Chester. The king in question was Henry VIII, and following the dissolution of the Abbey, the school was founded in 1541 in the newly formed cathedral, initially for the education of 24 poor and friendless boys. By 1960, the school had expanded significantly, causing a move to new premises just south of the city. In 2003, the school became fully co-educational. Beyond the Boathouse Inn dating from 1850 is the Grosvenor Rowing Club, formed in 1869, using the family name of the Duke of Westminster, whose estate lies further upstream. The large buildings on the left-hand side were built from the mid to late 19th century, once again for the well-to-do people of the day. Nowadays, many have been converted into nursing homes and the like. With the arrival of the railways in the mid-19th century, so people flocked to the city. Many of the rich people naturally chose to live in the suburbs next to the river, just like the area of Queen's Park on the left. And in 1852, the suspension bridge was built as a pedestrian linkage of the city. The present bridge replaced the original in 1923. Some of you may have seen or heard of Brown's department store in the city. Founded by Susanna Brown in the late 18th century, it later went on to become one of the best shops in the north of England. It was this same firm that in the 1880s provided funds for necessary restoration work and the planting of the grove of lime trees, which you can see all along the right-hand side of the river. Today the area is simply known as Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for. On behalf of Chester Boat, I would like to thank you all for sailing with us today. If you have enjoyed the cruise and commentary, then why not tell your friends? And if possible, please let us know on Chester Boat's social media channels. I also hope that you continue to enjoy the rest of your stay in Chester. On a final note, could I please ask you all to remain seated until the vessel is firmly and safely tied up on the landing stage.